And they answered and said, well, he'll come and destroy them. Now, I thought it's rather interesting that they could see what was wrong in that parable, but they couldn't see themselves until finally they caught the idea that Jesus was talking about them. But now, isn't it interesting that we can see the sins of others so easily? Brother, but we have such a hard time seeing our sins. There's something wrong in human nature, that we can see the sins of others so easily. Brother, I want to tell you, you take the President of the United States, brother, if he does anything wrong, I don't care what it is, they tell the whole world about it. He did this wrong. And if we see anybody else do anything wrong, brother, we know it. We immediately can tell it. He did wrong. He shouldn't have done that. He did wrong. But we don't see it ourselves. And this is why at the judgment day, we will really bring our own condemnation, because the thing that's wrong with us, we can see it in others, and we know it's wrong. For instance, if David, when you remember when he sinned and took Uriah, his wife, took Bathsheba, and Nathan came to him and told him the little parable of the man who had so many sheep, but he took one little sheep from a poor man. And Nathan said, what do you think ought to be done? David said, that man ought to die. And he could see it in the parable. He said, that man ought to die. And Nathan had said, well, you're the man. You see, and so dear ones, I'll tell you, we sure ought to be careful in condemning others, because so here's this thing. So Jesus answered them and spake to them. Now he goes on and gives them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is likened to a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. Again he sent forth other servants, saying, tell them which are bidden, behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them. But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then saith he to his servants, the wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid them to the marriage. So those servants went out into the highways, and gathered together all, as many as they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was furnished with guests. And the king came in to see the guests. He saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. And he saith unto him, friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then said the king to the servants, bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his precious word. Now, this part of this parable, of course, the first part does not apply to us. He's talking about those who had been listening to him, heard him in those days, and they didn't hear him. But now in this parable, he sent them out into the highways and byways to bring the people in, and that's where the Gentiles got in. That's you and I got in on the highway and byway. We didn't get in any other way. We weren't among the chosen few, but he wants his supper, his wedding supper, completely filled, and so he sent them out into the highways and the byways. And now he bid them all come in. I like the invitation Jesus gave. Bid them to come in. And look at this little verse, if I can find it back again. Anyway, he said, bid them come in, the bad and the good. And that's something. Bid the bad and the good. The invitation is to the bad man as well as the good man. Now, I like that. He said, you go out, and I want my people come into my wedding, and I want you to go out and invite them in. But our tendency today is to go out and find the good people and bring them into our church. Jesus said, you get the bad man too. The bad man has an invitation just as much as a good man. That man down in the tavern that we think maybe isn't quite fit for society and some of the things he may do, Jesus said, you get him, I want him as much as I do the fellow that's in a good neighborhood. I want them both. You invite the bad man. I'm so glad that that's in there. Well, you'll notice here that when they came to the wedding, it says here that they saw a man that had not on a wedding garment. Now, there's two knots in there. And it was in the 12th verse, 11th and 12th verse. When the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. And in the 12th verse, and he said to him, friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? Now, these two knots are entirely different. They do not mean the same thing. The first one, you'll notice, when they came in, he invited, and all kinds of people came. They were invited to come. The bad ones and the good ones, they all got in there. But there was a man who didn't have on a wedding garment, and when the king came in, he said, he saw a man that didn't have a wedding garment. Now, that not means just simply that he didn't have a wedding garment on. But when he asked him the question, in the Greek, we're in a problem here, because we don't have an English word for the translation, and so they put not in again. He saith unto him, friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? That not, in the Greek, the only thing we can do is tell you what it means, and there's no word for it. It just simply means, in the Greek translation, here, how is it that something took place in your mind that you did not want to submit to the regulation? Now, that's what that means. How is it? Because in those days, it's very common for kings, when they provided great feasts like that, they provided wedding garments. And somehow, in this man's mind, he didn't feel that was necessary. And so his garments may have been perfectly good, wonderful good, but it was not the garment provided. And so the king is asking him a question. Why is it that you have not... in your mind, you've changed in your mind, you would not submit to the rules and regulations of this wedding to put on a wedding garment? Now, I want you to notice, they cast him out. But I want you to know he was not cast out because he was bad. He was cast out because he didn't have on a wedding garment. The good and bad doesn't make any difference. I want you to know, when we get to heaven, people think, well, I'm good, or this man's bad, this man's good. It doesn't make any difference whether a man's good or bad. It's whether or not he has on a wedding garment. Can you see this? We many times think, well, brother, I think I'm pretty good. I want you to know, a bad man being bad never kept anybody out of heaven. And being good never got anybody in. Oh, I hope we can see this. Because we have a tendency in our minds to think that man's bad, this one's good. What difference does it make? To God, it doesn't make any difference. God, Jesus, the king said, bring the bad ones and the good ones. Get them all in here. Why? I've got a garment to put on all of them. And if they put the garment on, it doesn't make any difference whether they're good or bad. It's whether or not they've got the wedding garment on. And the king provided that. I want you to know, dear ones, that Jesus provides He provides the robe of righteousness, so that when we stand before Him at the judgment, our righteousness is filthy rags. We stand in His righteousness. If you don't have that gift, you can't get in. I don't care how good or bad you are. So when the king said, how is it that you have not submitted to the rules and regulations of a king's wedding and accepting the garment that I have provided? Why is it in your mind that you've rejected this? So when we stand at judgment bar of God to be whether or not we've rejected Jesus and his garment of salvation. He provides a robe of righteousness for us. We've got to put that on. That's the only garment that's worthwhile. So it's not a matter whether we're good or whether we're bad. And so the man was cast out, not because he was good or bad, but because he didn't have on the wedding garment. Well, what is God saying to us? He's saying, dear ones, the only way in the world to get to heaven is to submit to the will of God, to Jesus as King. Submit to him and follow him. And then I don't care, God has brought in the good and the bad. And it's amazing how many times God uses the fellow that was bad and seems to bypass the good one. He doesn't work on that basis. He doesn't bless a church on goodness and badness. I'm amazed how God can take a group of bad people and bless them. If they've turned around and submitted to Jesus and surrendered to him, he'll turn around and use them mightily. Why? They put on a robe of righteousness. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? And some of you are worried about whether or not you're good enough. I'm not good enough to make it. Come on now. I'm just not good enough to make it. What difference does it make whether you're good enough to make it? Put on the robe of righteousness. That'll get you in. I stop and think of it as I read through the New Testament. The dear apostles, there was strife among them. They were hard-hearted. They were asleep. But they got in. They got in. They didn't keep them out. Glory. You can get in. Why? Jesus provides the robe of righteousness. Lord, give me yours. Mine will never get me in. I'm not good enough. Give me yours. That's the only way you're going to get in. Quit worrying about whether or not you're good enough. I can tell you now you're not. You say you're not. I agree with you. I'll not make it either. But he's provided the garment. Take it. Put it on. And that's what'll get us in. He's not going to look whether or not we've been good enough or bad enough. Oh, what a wonderful King. What a wonderful Savior. Cast him out. Why? Not because he's good or bad. He didn't have the wedding garment on. And Jesus provided that when he died on Calvary. Provide the righteousness for us, the righteousness of the saints. This is because of Jesus Christ. Thank God forever for Jesus. What a King. He provides the wedding garment for us all, for the whole world, the good and the bad. I'm so thankful. What a King. We were singing about Jesus. What a marvelous King. Oh, I tell you, dear ones, I love the stories about Jesus in the New Testament, the Gospels, but I want to tell you something. Those days are over, and you've heard me talk about it. Take the book of Revelation if you want to know what Jesus is like. The book of Revelation, the first chapter starts it out. It says the revelation of Jesus Christ, and Seiss, this great scholar, that they study his book there in Asbury, that the book of Revelation starts right at the very beginning. The revelation of Jesus Christ. The book of Revelation is primarily a revelation of Jesus. And we many times are concerned about coming events. Brother, I want to tell you it's a revelation of Jesus, more than a revelation of coming events. Read this to find out what Jesus is like. You'll find out what he's like now. You'll never see him coming with a staff in his hand and carrying a little lamb. There he was a poverty-stricken teacher of Nazareth, and he came in that way. But look at this in the book of Revelation. I like the picture of him now. And it says there in the first chapter, when John turned, he said, I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to his foot, girt about the paps with a golden girdle. He never had any gold on when he walked the shores of Galilee, but he has on now. Brother, he's a king now. He's not walking as a poverty-stricken teacher of Nazareth, walking the dusty roads and having only a garment on his back. All the wealth of heaven is his. And he's dressed like a king and acts like a king, and he'll come as a king. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire, and his feet like as fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. And his voices are the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand the 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. And his countenance was as the sun that shineth in his strength. And John said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. Some of the songs that we sing, and some of the, start quiet about getting to heaven. And one song I heard about, when we get to heaven, I'll walk up and shake hands with Jesus. You won't do anything of the kind. Brother, you might have, when he was on earth, walked up and shook hands with him and said, I'd like to shake hands with you. But this one is a king. You'll fall on your face before this one. He's king. And he'll come in all of his glory and his power and honor, and with the hosts of angels with him. And every knee shall bow. You won't even be on your feet, let alone walk up and shake hands with him. He's king. And this is the one that died on Calvary to give us a robe of righteousness to make us fit for heaven. It's his robe that we put on that gets us in. Thank God for that. So this is a picture of Jesus as he is now. And when he's coming again, every knee shall bow, all atheists and infidels. They'll cry out for the rocks and the mountains to fall on them. They may laugh at him, but they'll never spit on him again. And they'll never pluck out his beard, brother. They'll cry for the rocks and the mountains to fall on them if they don't have on the robe of righteousness he has prepared. This king has all the governments of the world and under his control. In the 4th chapter, when John saw him, all the elders fell down before the king and worshipped him and cast their crowns before him, saying, Thou art worthy to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they were and are created. Thank God, this is the Jesus that now reigns, that rules over the earth, this earth. All the governments under his control. He can do anything he wants to. But God wants people who will submit to his will and quit worrying about being bad or good. Submit to the will of God. Take on his righteousness, and he'll be the one to help us to live and act like we ought to live and act. If we don't have something we ought to have, ask Jesus for it. As Reese Howells, I mentioned the other night, he said, Jesus, you'll have to change my nature to love those orphans. And he did. God does that. He changes our nature, whatever it is. But we look to him to do it. We receive of him. I remember a man that used to be in our church years ago. And he was an honest man, but a very, very wicked man. God saved him, but also he still kept his honesty. And I was talking with him one day, and he said, I just don't like black people. He said, I might as well be honest about it. He said, I just don't like them. And he said, God would have to change me if I did. Well, I mentioned before, God's not upset with honesty. But he came back smiling. It seemed like it wasn't many days later. He came back, he said, God did it, God did it. And I said, what? Well, he said, I was in the grocery store the other day, and somebody said, look at that beautiful child. He turned around, it was a black child. And he said, for the first time in my life, I saw a beautiful black child. And he said, God did it. God changed this. He's the one who changes this. Some things may not be in us. Well, let's look to him to change us. He does the changing of it. And he'll bring us through. Let's continue to submit to the will of God. He'll bring us through if we do.